So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are doing something pretty radical with the foundational text.
Yeah, we're really stripping it down to the studs today.
Exactly. I mean, we are looking at the opening verses of Surah 27, which is An-Naml, or the ant. And we're doing this entirely through the analytical framework of Ghulam Ahmed Parwaz.
Which means we are leaving all the standard religious sentimentality at the door.
Right, completely at the door. We are not looking at this as a collection of magical tales or mystical wonders.
No, not at all. We're asking you to put on the hat of a master sociologist or like a systems engineer.
Yeah, systems engineer is a great way to put it, because what we're actually analyzing here is a structural blueprint. It's about how societies succeed, how they fail, and, when they require a massive systemic intervention.
And we should probably lay down a ground rule right now for you listening. There is no magic in this framework.
Zero magic. None.
We are dissecting civilizational survival. So, if you were looking for mystical comfort, this specific deep dive might actually be a little jarring.
It definitely will be, because, well, let's just start with the biggest provocation right away. Think about every tradition that encounters the story of Moses at the burning bush.
Oh, right. The ultimate cinematic moment.
Exactly. It's always framed as this massive supernatural visitation. A prophet wanders into the desert, a bush bursts into these magical flames, and suddenly a booming voice from the heavens demands blind faith.
Right, a total suspension of logic. You're just supposed to fall to your knees in mystical awe.
But when you apply this sociological lens from the source material, the text's actually doing something completely different. It's not a supernatural wonder at all.
It really isn't. I mean, look at what Moses actually says. What is his very first response when he sees the fire in the dark?
He doesn't start singing hymns.
No, he doesn't. He turns to his family. They're out in the freezing cold of the Sinai wilderness, and he says, "I will bring you kabar."
Kabar. And that is, that's such a crucial word here.
It is the whole key to the encounter. Because kabar is not a word for divine revelation or devotion. It means information, actionable intelligence. It's the exact terminology that a military scout would use when bringing back battlefield updates.
Wow. So he's literally saying, I'm going to run a reconnaissance operation?
Exactly. He tells his family to stay put while he gathers data. Or at the very least, he says he'll bring back a burning brand, a Kaaba, to warm them up.
Which is just raw, intense pragmatism.
Completely. He has an immediate biological problem. His family is freezing. And he has an unknown anomaly in the distance. His instinct is survival and data collection.
I mean, that is a purely epistemological statement. It's not devotional. He is the ultimate rational actor facing an unknown variable.
And that pragmatism sets the tone for the entire text. It explodes the myth of the divine visitation. Because the surah actually opens with these letters, tasin.
And what do those letters signal in this framework?
They act as a preamble. They signal that what follows is an operational briefing specifically for people who are oriented toward evidence.
Okay, so it's acting like a sorting algorithm for humanity right from the start.
That's exactly what it is. A sorting algorithm. It immediately divides the human population into two operating modes.
So mode one is the Moses mode. The people oriented toward evidence who want actionable intelligence.
Right. And then you have the second mode. And what's fascinating is how the text describes this second group. It doesn't use traditional words like sinners.
Yeah, the source material points out that it calls them people who do not believe in the hereafter.
But we have to clarify what the hereafter means in this specific socioeconomic framework.
Right, because we aren't talking about a literal afterlife of, harps or pitchforks here.
No, we're talking about cause and effect. Denying the hereafter means refusing to accept the long-term structural consequences of your actions.
So it's the arrogance of thinking you can exploit people forever without the social architecture collapsing.
Exactly. It's a psychological trait. The text says these people are impressed by themselves.
Man, that phrasing is so precise. Impressed by themselves.
Right. It's not that they are worshiping the wrong statues. It's that they are in an echo chamber of their own elite arrogance.
They're so self-impressed that they refuse to look at the evidence of their own system's decay.
So the opening move of this text isn't a magical story. It is a highly technical breakdown. Evidence gatherers on one side, self-impressed elites blindly marching toward collapse on the other.
Okay, so if we understand that this is the operating system of the text, that it demands clear vision and data, we have to look at the concept of hidayat.
Yeah, this is a major linguistic deep dive in Parwaz's analysis.
Because hidayat is usually translated as guidance, right? And usually that means some warm, fuzzy feeling in your heart, like, oh, I feel guided today.
Right, a sudden mystical intuition. But the ancient Arabic root of hidayat has absolutely nothing to do with internal mysticism.
It was a physical, functional term, wasn't it?
It was used by seafarers and desert travelers. Hidayat referred to a highly prominent rock or a constructed marker that rises out of the ocean or the desert.
Like a literal signpost.
Exactly. A structure designed to guide ships safely to shore.
Okay, so if we use an analogy here, it's like a lighthouse.
A lighthouse is the perfect analogy.
Because think about how a lighthouse actually functions. You don't go to the base of the lighthouse, build a shrine, and start singing songs to it.
No, that would be completely missing the point of the structure.
Right. You use its light to navigate dangerous waters without crashing your ship. The lighthouse itself is passive. It doesn't magically grab your steering wheel.
It just stands there as an unambiguous declaration of reality. It tells you, hey, here are the jagged rocks, and here's the safe harbor.
And the text actually refers to itself as mubin.
Yes, meaning clear, manifest, like a prominent signpost on a flat road.
So it shouldn't require 18 esoteric disciplines to decode it.
Not at all. If you understand the foundational vocabulary, it's entirely clear. It's a functional tool for civilizational navigation.
But you know, a lighthouse is really only useful if the person at the helm of the ship actually knows how to steer.
Right, you need a competent navigator.
And the text uses a specific word for this navigator, the mutaki.
Oh, this is where the traditional translations really drop the ball.
They usually translate mutaki as the pious or the righteous.
Which immediately gives you this mental image of a monk in a cave, right?
Yeah, someone completely isolated, trying to keep their spiritual clothes clean by avoiding the real world.
But the source material violently rejects that image. It brings up this fascinating historical anecdote involving Umar to redefine taqwa, which is the root of mutaki.
I love this analogy. Break down what Umar said.
So Umar was asked to define taqwa. And instead of giving a theological answer, he asked a very practical question. He said, imagine you have to walk down a narrow path, and it is completely surrounded by dense, thorny bushes. How do you walk?
Well, I wouldn't just stroll casually. I'd be pulling my clothes in tight.
Right, you'd be gathering your garments.
I'd be stepping incredibly carefully, scanning every bush, constantly adjusting my posture so I don't get snagged or torn by the thorns.
And Umar said, that exact state of hypervigilance that is taqwa.
Wow, so it's not about looking holy at all.
Not even a little bit. It's about supreme situational awareness.
So a mutaki is someone who moves through the incredibly dangerous, complex, thorny socioeconomic realities of life with intense vigilance.
Exactly. They aren't retreating into a safety bubble. They are actively engaging with the world, but protecting their mission from getting derailed by destructive forces.
They are navigating the thorns to reach a specific, evidence-based destination.
Yes. So we have the lighthouse, which is the clear guidance, and we have the mutaki, the vigilant navigator.
But what happens when that navigator actually reaches the shore and starts building a society?
That brings us to the operational engines of this system, salat and zakat.
And again, we have to strip away the traditional ritualistic definitions here.
We really do. Because traditionally, salat is universally understood just as physical prayer, bowing and prostrating at specific times of the day.
But Parwez's analysis insists that reducing salat to a private physical ritual completely strips it of its civilizational power.
Right. It makes it toothless. To understand it, you have to look at the linguistic origins of the word.
Which comes from the racetrack, surprisingly.
Yeah, it comes from ancient horse racing. When horses run on a track, the winning horse is obviously in the lead. But the horse that follows immediately behind the leader, running so closely that its head physically touches the back of the leading horse, that second horse is in a state of salat.
It's moving in perfect tandem.
Right. There is absolutely no gap, no interruption, no deviation from the leader. That horse is called a muzali.
So if we take that image from the racetrack and apply it to a macro-sociological level, what does it mean to establish salat?
It means establishing a society that closely tracks and implements the divine laws of socioeconomic justice without any gap.
So it's not about individuals praying in a vacuum, it's systemic alignment.
Exactly. It's an uninterrupted collective adherence to a functional system. The actual daily operation of the society has to move in perfect tandem with the principles of equity.
You can't have daylight between the law's demand for justice and how the society actually functions.
Right, because if there's a gap, the salat is broken.
Okay, but a perfectly calibrated system still needs fuel. It needs an economic engine. And that is where zakat comes in.
And this is another concept we have to completely redefine based on the source text.
Because the modern understanding of zakat is just charity, right? Like giving 2.5% of your wealth to the poor once a year.
Yeah, and the source material dismantles that idea completely. The linguistic root of zakat means nourishment and growth.
So how does the text view it?
It views zakat as the systematic provision of the means of nourishment and development to the entirety of humanity within that system.
The entirety of humanity, not just the ones you feel bad for.
Right. It is not an arbitrary tax. And it is absolutely not a guilt-relieving handout from the ultra-rich to the ultra-poor.
Because think about how that works today. You have a system where a corporation exploits labor, offshores profits to dodge taxes, and hoards immense wealth.
Yeah, a massive concentration of resources.
And then the CEO donates a tiny fraction of that wealth to build a hospital wing with their name on it, and society applauds them as a righteous philanthropist.
In Parwaz's reading, that entire dynamic is a perceptual illusion. Giving away a few coins while millions remain structurally locked out of basic necessities is the opposite of zakat.
Right. Zakat isn't personal charity, it's structural equity. It implies a macroeconomic architecture where surplus wealth, anything beyond your immediate legitimate needs, is systematically routed back into the collective.
It ensures universal baseline nourishment. No individual goes to sleep hungry. Everyone has shelter. Everyone has the means to develop their potential.
So if a single person in the town starves, the system of zakat has fundamentally failed.
Exactly. The responsibility lies with the collective architecture, not just hoping a rich neighbor feels generous today.
But implementing that kind of system, one that guarantees universal nourishment, that requires an immense amount of political power.
It does, which is exactly why the source material stresses that salat and zakat are impossible to fully realize if a society is subjugated.
Oh, that makes sense. You can't build an independent welfare state if you're enslaved by another empire.
Right, you must have political autonomy. You must have a sovereign state.
Because if the Israelites are living under the economic extraction of Pharaoh's regime, they can't just set up a parallel, perfectly equitable economy.
No, they are just cogs in Pharaoh's extraction machine. To establish salat and zakat, you must control the levers of resource distribution.
Okay, so that is the blueprint for a functional society. But what about the mechanics of failure?
Yeah, what happens when a civilization refuses to set up this system?
Right. When a ruling class decides to just hoard everything, exploit the labor pool, and actively ignore the consequences of their extraction, how does the system process that?
That introduces the law of requital. In the source material, it's called mukafati amal.
And this connects back to the sorting algorithm at the beginning, right? The people who deny the hereafter.
Yes. Again, the socioeconomic reading reframes this entirely. Denying the hereafter isn't about the afterlife. It is a present tense structural dysfunction.
It's refusing to accept the law of cause and effect within the social architecture.
Exactly. It's the arrogance of an elite class, thinking they can strip mine a society's resources indefinitely and somehow magically avoid systemic collapse.
It's the delusion that you can push an engine way past the red line forever without it exploding in your face.
And the text outlines a very specific consequence for this arrogance. In verse 27:4.
And the punishment isn't a fiery pit.
No, the text says their evil deeds are beautified for them and they wander blindly.
The punishment is psychological blindness, perceptual distortion.
We really need to break down the mechanics of how a society's leadership actually goes blind.
Yeah, how does that happen systemically?
Well, when an elite class concentrates power, their primary goal becomes protecting their own comfort.
Yeah.
And to do that, they have to suppress dissent.
Right, you silence the whistleblowers, you silence the journalists, the evidence gatherers.
Exactly, and by doing that, they are systematically disabling the society's corrective feedback loops.
It's like, imagine you are flying a commercial airliner. You are completely reliant on a dashboard of error reporting software, sensors telling you if the engine is overheating.
Right, vital feedback.
Disabling dissent in a society is the equivalent of a pilot smashing the blinking red lights on the dashboard with a hammer just because the alarms are annoying.
That's a perfect analogy. The plane is still going to crash, but the pilot spends the final 10 minutes enjoying the quiet, entirely convinced everything is fine.
And the result of those disabled feedback loops is that the elites look at their exploitative actions and genuinely believe they are virtuous.
Their deeds are beautified for them. They've built an echo chamber that validates their destruction.
The source material has this incredibly visceral example of this.
The man with the birds, right?
Yes. It describes a wealthy man who spends his entire day ruthlessly exploiting human labor. extracting maximum profit, paying starvation wages, crushing people.
But then, in the morning,
In the morning, he steps out onto his balcony and scatters a handful of grain for the birds. Or he puts a block of salt out for his cows.
and he goes to sleep at night, utterly convinced that he is a saint.
Because his exploitation has been beautified by his own minor performative acts of charity.
That cognitive dissonance is exactly what the framework means when it discusses Satan.
Okay, let's unpack that, because Parwise's analysis does not view Satan as a literal monster with horns, right?
No, not a physical entity whispering into people's ears.
So what is the mechanism of the whispering? What is Satan here?
It's the internal hardening of the human heart. It is the innate human capacity to rationalize your own destructive desires.
So when a leader refuses to accept empirical feedback, their empathy just hardens.
Exactly. The whispers are their own internal justifications, the mental gymnastics required to rebrand greed as virtue.
The source material uses the metaphor of undigested deeds for this state, which is so deeply unsettling.
It compares a corrupt civilization to a diseased animal. The animal eats constantly, consuming massive amounts of food, and its stomach becomes hugely bloated.
So to an untrained eye, the animal looks fat and prosperous.
Right. But its digestive system is entirely broken. The food passes through undigested, providing zero cellular energy.
So the animal is literally starving to death while carrying the illusion of obesity.
It is the perfect description of late-stage imperial decay. A civilization consumes massive global resources, builds staggering monuments, accumulates unimaginable wealth at the very top.
It looks incredibly bloated and prosperous.
But there is no structural nourishment. There is no zakat. The structural integrity is wasting away while the elite wander blindly toward the cliff.
And that brings us perfectly to Pharaoh's Egypt, which is the ultimate historical archetype of this exact dysfunction.
Oh, absolutely. Pharaoh's Egypt is a civilization with entirely disabled feedback loops.
Pharaoh's entire system is built on unverifiable assertions of power. I mean, he literally claims divine ownership of the Nile River.
Right. He claims he controls the agricultural cycles, and the elite are so insulated that they cannot perceive their own rot.
And a system like that cannot fix itself because it has deleted its own error reporting software.
It requires an external shock. It requires an intervention from someone operating in that first mode of the sorting algorithm we talked about.
Someone oriented toward evidence, which is the exact operational environment Moses is deployed into.
And the contrast here is just stark. You have Pharaoh in this bloated, delusional palace complex, and then you have Moses, completely stripped of status, traveling at night through the freezing wilderness.
And this brings us back to the anomaly in the dark. Verse 27:7. Moses sees a fire in the distance.
And his first instinct is kabar, actionable intelligence.
He tells his family to stay put while he runs a reconnaissance operation.
Because his mind is oriented toward evidence, he is primed for the encounter.
He's the mutaki navigating the dark.
Right, and Parwez heavily emphasizes this next point. God does not speak in physical human sound waves.
There is no larynx vibrating in the desert air.
No booming voice echoing off the canyon walls. The voice Moses perceives is a profound awakening of his consciousness.
It is the assignment of a mission.
Yes, the rational principle of the universe is interfacing with a human mind that is rigorously prepared to receive it.
Now, does the specific geography of this encounter matter? Because the text refers to the surroundings as blessed, which usually implies the dirt itself is somehow magical.
Sociologically, the location is the strategic target zone. This region, Palestine and its surroundings, is where the Israelites are meant to establish their autonomous state.
Because right now, they are subjugated in Egypt.
Exactly. So the blessing of the land isn't magical soil. It is the potential for socio-economic prosperity.
It's the future site where the engines of Salat and Zakat can actually be implemented under sovereign law.
Right. So Moses approaches the anomaly seeking intelligence, and he receives a mission briefing from the ultimate authority of the universe.
But pay close attention to the specific vocabulary that authority uses to introduce itself. It is critical.
It is entirely tailored to the operational reality of the mission. In verse 27:9, the awakening in Moses' consciousness says, I am God, the mighty Aziz and the wise Hakim.
Which is fascinating, because in almost every other context, the divine introduction leads with compassion and mercy.
But not here.
Why does the voice omit mercy and go straight to mighty and wise?
Because of the nature of the target. Moses is being deployed as an insurgent against a brutal, entrenched political superpower.
Pharaoh is a tyrant. He only respects absolute force.
Right. Moses does not need to know that the universe is gentle in this moment. He needs operational backing.
He needs to know that the force deploying him possesses structural superiority.
And that is what Aziz means. Absolute systemic power. A force that is unassailable, that cannot be displaced or outmaneuvered by human tyranny.
And Hakim represents rational, flawless governance based on evidence.
Exactly. The power of the Aziz isn't arbitrary chaos. It is perfectly calibrated by the Hakim.
So the rational principle is essentially stating, you are challenging an empire, but you are backed by the underlying structural laws of the universe. My power cannot be broken, and my strategy is without flaw.
It's the ultimate mission briefing. But receiving that briefing is one thing. Executing it is entirely different.
Moses grew up in the Egyptian palaces. He knows exactly how terrifying the state apparatus is.
Right. Before he can be deployed, the rational principle has to run a credential check. Can this human mind actually handle the reality of the mission?
And this brings us to the pivotal scene with the staff. Now, I need to push back heavily here.
Okay, let's do it.
We established a firm rule at the beginning.
Right.
No magic. We are viewing this through a systems engineering lens.
Right.
Yet the text explicitly states that Moses throws down his wooden staff and it transforms into a moving creature, a snake. How does this framework explain a piece of wood turning into a reptile without invoking magic?
It's a crucial question. In the Tolu'i Islam framework, this event isn't a parlor trick. It is a profound psychological and operational credential check.
Okay, so what do the symbols represent to Moses' neurology?
Think about a wooden staff. It is a tool of utility. It's rigid, predictable, and entirely under Moses' control.
It represents his current static reality.
Exactly. Now think about a snake. It is the ultimate representation of unpredictable, chaotic, dangerous variables.
Okay, I follow that.
The rational principle is asking Moses a question. Can you take the predictable tools you rely on, throw them into the arena of this immense civilizational mission, and handle the terrifying reality that ensues without reverting to superstitious panic?
Wow. Because when he throws the staff and it becomes something alive and dangerous, his immediate human reaction is to recoil in fear.
Of course it is. Taking down an empire is an overwhelmingly chaotic proposition.
But the voice commands him in verse 27:10, do not fear, you are among those who are secure.
But how does a snake equate to security?
Right.
The security offered here is operational security. It is a guarantee from the Aziz and the Hakim. The rational principle is telling Moses that he's protected within the parameters of the assignment.
So the wood becoming a snake proves to Moses that the underlying reality of the universe is not bound by human assumptions of predictability.
Exactly. Moses is forced to physically grasp the chaos. He has to pick the staff back up.
And by doing so, he proves his neurological state is ready to handle the unpredictable variables of dismantling an empire.
He overcomes his fear of the chaotic variables because he trusts the underlying system is sound. He passes the credential check.
He accepts the mission, and the target is Pharaoh.
And remember, Pharaoh's power rests entirely on unverifiable assertions.
He claims total ownership over the productive systems of Egypt.
Right. He claims he's the source of all agrarian prosperity, the owner of the Nile, the controller of the economy.
So Moses is instructed to bring 9 signs to Pharaoh.
Now, traditionally, these are read as the 10 plagues of Egypt, framed as supernatural tortures.
Cinematic spectacles designed to break Pharaoh's will through sheer terror, rivers of blood, swarms of frogs, skies blackened by locusts.
But Parwaz's sociological reading frames these entirely differently. The 9 signs are not stage magic.
They are 9 evidentiary, systemic challenges to Pharaoh's legitimacy.
Yes, they are targeted economic sanctions.
We have to analyze how Pharaoh's agrarian monopoly functioned.
Right. His authority required everyone, the Egyptian elite and the enslaved Israelites, to believe that he controlled the natural and economic order.
If Pharaoh owns the gods of the river and the soil, his rule is absolute.
So the 9 signs are specific, targeted demonstrations proving that Pharaoh does not control the underlying laws of nature.
Let's break down the mechanics of these signs as evidentiary challenges. Take the failure of the river, which is often described as the water turning to blood.
Right. In a biological context, that's a massive red algae bloom or severe ecological degradation that suffocates the aquatic life.
The fish die, the water becomes toxic.
So if Pharaoh truly controls the hydrology of the Nile, as he claims, why can't he fix the water supply?
The ecological failure is an undeniable piece of evidence. It proves that the biological realities of the ecosystem operate entirely independently of Pharaoh's decrees.
Exactly. And what about the swarms of locusts?
A massive locust swarm is an apocalyptic event for an agrarian economy.
It consumes the entire agricultural output in a matter of days.
So in this framework, it isn't just a creepy-crawly punishment. It is a profound structural proof.
The locusts break the supply chain. The sign forces the Egyptian elite to look at their starving silos and realize the truth.
Which is, your sovereign's divine power cannot stop a swarm of insects from crashing the foundational economy of the empire.
It peels back the illusion of absolute control. It demonstrates that Pharaoh is not a god. He is merely a vulnerable administrator of a fragile, interconnected system.
Every single sign, the frogs, the agricultural failures, the livestock disease, dismantles his unverifiable assertions of power using empirical reality.
Moses is not a preacher sent to sing hymns in the court and hope Pharaoh's heart softens.
Moses is a corrective feedback mechanism.
He is an external alarm bell, forcefully injected into a system that had deliberately deleted its own error reporting software.
Because Pharaoh smashed the dashboard to maintain his comfort, the rational principle sends Moses to physically demonstrate that the engine is on fire and the society is collapsing.
When an elite class becomes so insulated that they refuse to acknowledge the consequences of their exploitation when they beautify their own systemic violence, the universe does not send a philosopher to debate them.
It sends a mutaki.
It sends someone highly vigilant of the socioeconomic realities, armed with undeniable evidence to challenge the structural legitimacy of the regime.
This is incredible. If we zoom out and synthesize what the opening 9 verses of Surah An-Naml actually constructed, is a comprehensive, highly sophisticated theory of civilizational mission.
It really is. It establishes a permanent principle alongside changing variables.
The permanent principle is that the universe's rational engine, the Aziz and the Hakim, does not operate through magical spectacle.
No, it operates by assigning specific, evidence-based missions to receptive, pragmatic minds.
It requires human agents who seek Kabar actionable intelligence to execute its correctives.
But the changing variables are the contexts. We are not living in ancient Egypt anymore.
Right, there are no literal pharaohs building monuments with chariot armies today.
But the underlying sociology has not changed at all. Every era, every failing corporation, every corrupt political system generates its own version of the burning bush.
It generates an anomaly.
The anomaly is the crisis that the current tyrannical system cannot explain, predict, or control.
It might be a sudden supply chain collapse, an ecological disaster, a technological disruption.
Or a massive, unforeseen social movement. It is a fire in the distance that the elite's broken dashboard totally failed to register.
Which brings this entirely back to you, the listener. The text, in its opening lines, constructed a sorting algorithm dividing humanity into 2 modes.
Right. When you encounter that anomaly, when you see the fire in the dark, what is your default operating mode?
Do you respond with the instinct of the elite? Do you say, I am impressed by myself, my worldview is complete, I do not need to look closely at this problem because acknowledging it threatens my comfort?
Do you beautify your own inaction and allow the perceptual distortion to guide you blindly?
Or do you respond with the epistemological instinct of Moses, the instinct of the mutaki, carefully navigating the thorny path?
Do you look at the unknown and decide, I will go gather intelligence. I will bring back Kabar.
The survival of any complex society depends entirely on maintaining a critical mass of people operating in that second mode.
It requires minds willing to navigate the hazards, demand empirical evidence, and openly challenge unverifiable assertions of power.
Look at the structures you participate in every single day. Look at your workplace hierarchy, your local political systems, the macroeconomy, the digital platforms that curate your information.
Look closely for the disabled feedback loops. Where are the blinking red lights that everyone in leadership is pretending not to see?
Which systems have beautified their own decay?
Because identifying the broken loops is only the first step. The source material demands way more than passive observation.
When you inevitably notice those disabled loops, when you spot the fire in the distance that the elite system is desperately ignoring, are you prepared for the operational reality of what comes next?
You can't just stand there in the dark and use the fire to warm your hands while the system collapses around you.
The text demands engagement. If you seek the intelligence, you must be prepared for the terrifying reality that you might be the corrective feedback mechanism the system requires. The anomaly is a call to intelligence. You have to bring back the Kabar.